The sky is still a deep blue, fading into the first pale hints of gold. Somewhere, beyond the dunes, the Nile meanders in silence, cutting its eternal path through a kingdom that once knew gods and kings, not just in myth, but in stone and flesh. Tonight, we drift back in time, not to the days of Cleopatra or Tutankhamun, but to an earlier chapter, one both powerful and quietly forgotten. We will walk the sandstone corridors of a temple etched into living cliffs. We will listen to the rhythmic chisel of stonecutters, feel the warm hush of linen robes, and breathe in the incense of sacred halls. And we will come to know the queen who once ruled not beside a king, but as one. This is the story of Hatshepsut, the pharaoh who ruled Egypt in peace and prosperity, whose image was carved with a false beard, whose legacy was buried under time and silence. So, allow yourself to relax. Let the past unfold gently around you as we begin with something quiet, the rhythm of a life long ago, the rhythm of ancient Egypt. Imagine yourself waking up in Thebes just as the sun is rising above the eastern hills. The air is cool still, cool enough that the clay walls of your home still hold the nighttime chill. You lie on a simple wooden frame woven with plant fibers, your head resting on a curved headrest carved from smooth wood. The scent of earth and straw mingles in the stillness. Life begins early here. The city of Thebes, capital of Egypt during the 18th dynasty, is stirring. Somewhere nearby, you hear the first lowing of cattle being led to pasture. A woman hums as she kneads dough. A child chases a chicken across the courtyard. The world is waking, but gently. The Nile glimmers in the distance, a smooth, reflective ribbon that brings not just water, but life, work, and rhythm to the kingdom. You rise, wrap yourself in linen, the cloth stiff at first, but softening with wear, and step into the new day. Under the rule of Pharaoh Hatshepsut, Egypt is at peace. Borders are secure. Trade flows steadily. Fields along the Nile are green and full. And for most people, life continues much as it always has, shaped by routine, bound by nature, and graced by divine order. You are neither rich nor poor, a craftsman perhaps, or a potter's wife. You wake early not because you must, but because the sun dictates it. Your meals are simple: bread made from emmer wheat, beer brewed from barley, and vegetables stewed with garlic and leeks. Occasionally, fish from the river or fowl from a snare. Meat is rare, but not unknown. Honey is a luxury. Dates are sweet rewards. You live in a home made of mud brick, whitewashed to keep the heat at bay. Its roof is flat, sometimes used for sleeping on warm nights. Inside, shelves hold jars of grain and oil. Amulets hang in corners. Scarabs are tucked away in chests. The gods are everywhere, quietly watching. Most people in Hatshepsut's Egypt work with their hands. Farmers till narrow strips of land that flood each year with silt. Bakers grind grain with heavy stones. Women weave linen on wooden looms. Scribes sit cross-legged on mats, dipping reed pens into black and red ink, recording everything from harvests to temple rituals. There is dignity in work, and spirituality too. The line between labor and worship is thin. A man who shapes a statue of Osiris sees himself as serving the gods. A woman who mixes scented oils for a noble's tomb feels the weight of eternity in her work. Temples are the beating hearts of cities, not merely places of worship, but hubs of education, economy, and law. The Temple of Karnak, already centuries old, stands like a stone forest beside the Nile. Columns soar like papyrus stalks. Priests walk in near silence, their heads shaved, their bodies purified. They carry out rituals most people will never witness, yet even the commoner prays. Before meals, at dawn, during illness, in birth and death. Offerings are left at household shrines, incantations whispered for safe childbirth or protection from scorpions. Religion is not separate, it is the current running through everything. Few in the city speak the name of the pharaoh often. She is distant, divine. Yet her presence is felt in every loaf of bread, every statue raised, every tax collected. Hatshepsut is a woman, but rules as king. She wears the uraeus, the striped headdress, the false beard. She is His Majesty, spoken of in the masculine tense, not to deceive, but to preserve the sacred role. Still, among the people, there is curiosity. Some whisper admiration. Others simply continue as they always have, because the Pharaoh, whatever form they take, is part of Ma'at, the divine order, and under her rule there is order. Trade ships return with incense and gold. Taxes are fair. Roads are repaired. Crops are plentiful. The rhythms of life continue, steady and slow. Children play in the courtyards. Their hair is shaved except for one long lock. They chase each other with palm fronds or splash in irrigation canals. They are raised in the rhythms of their parents, learning by doing, watching, repeating. Boys may become scribes, soldiers, or stonecutters. Girls may become weavers, brewers, or wives of craftsmen. But life offers more than simple roles. It offers a place in something eternal. Elders sit in doorways, eyes shaded, telling stories passed down through generations, of gods who weep, of battles fought long ago, of love, betrayal, and the laughter of the gods. Their voices are slow, their words well-worn. A day in Thebes is full, but not loud. The pound of the rain, the creak of leather bellows, the distant thud of stone on stone. At dusk, the sounds fade. People return home. Oil lamps flicker. Shadows grow long. Someone plays a soft tune on a lute, plucking the strings with quiet joy. The air cools. The stars emerge. The same stars watched by ancestors, named after gods, woven into stories of creation. As you lie on your roof, the breeze brushing over your skin, the world feels complete. Not easy, but whole. Difficult, but known. This is life under Hatshepsut. Not a golden age in the sense of wealth or wonder, but golden in its harmony. In the rhythm of sun and river, work and rest, breath and prayer. Long before she would rule Egypt, Hatshepsut was simply a child of the palace. Born around 1507 BCE, she was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and his great royal wife, Ahmose. Hers was a childhood shaped not by uncertainty, but by proximity to greatness. A world enclosed in palatial walls, frescoed ceilings, and the ever-present scent of cedar and incense. Imagine her, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, trailing behind attendants through the columned halls of a royal court. Her hair intricately braided, her limbs perfumed and powdered. She would have studied hieroglyphs, listened to the rhythm of prayers, and watched with quiet intensity as her father received diplomats, priests, and generals. She was not heir to the throne, but she was beloved, and crucially, she was born of the great wife, the queen, which lent her a legitimacy that would one day be essential. Her father, Thutmose I, was a powerful warrior king, expanding Egypt's reach deep into Nubia and across the Levant. From him, Hatshepsut inherited a sharp political mind and a deep sense of order. Ma'at, the divine balance of life and rule. From her mother, she likely learned diplomacy, elegance, and the ceremonial demands of palace life. As was customary, Hatshepsut was married to her half-brother Thutmose II, son of Thutmose I, and a lesser wife. It was not a union of romance, but of power. Through this marriage, her bloodline and his authority were fused. Thutmose II was a modest figure by comparison, frailer, more reserved, possibly younger. As queen, Hatshepsut took on the ceremonial role of great royal wife, but also much more. She was not content to remain in the background. In temple reliefs, she appears alongside her husband at state functions. In inscriptions, her name is more prominent than expected. Her fingerprints were already on governance. When Thutmose II died young, their son, Thutmose III, was still a child. And so, the court made a careful choice. Hatshepsut would act as regent, ruling on behalf of the boy king until he came of age. A common enough arrangement. But what came next was far from typical. For a time, Hatshepsut ruled as regent in traditional female regalia. But slowly, changes came. She began appearing in formal imagery, wearing the symbols of kingship. The Nemes headdress, the crook and flail, the ceremonial kilt. She was depicted making offerings to the gods alone, without her nephew beside her. The inscriptions changed. No longer king's wife or regent, she was named Pharaoh. It did not happen overnight. It was a careful, deliberate transition. She emphasized her divine lineage, claiming the god Amun had chosen her. She pointed to her father's affection, saying Thutmose I had named her heir in secret. Whether this was truth or careful revision mattered little. It was believed, and belief carried weight. Importantly, she did not depose Thutmose III. He remained her junior co-regent in name, while she took on full kingly duties. It was a balancing act, honoring tradition while quietly rewriting it. Imagine now the many artisans and scribes summoned to create this new image of rule. For in Egypt, to be seen was to be known, and to be known was to exist. Statues of Hatshepsut began to appear with male features, strong jawlines, broad shoulders, the ceremonial false beard. Yet the inscriptions always used feminine grammar. She was a king who was a woman, and a woman who was a king. In some depictions, she retained a softer face, more graceful, more serene. In others, she conformed entirely to masculine royal iconography. This was not confusion. It was strategy. She was sculpting her own mythology. Her temple inscriptions told of her divine birth, of Amun taking the form of her father to conceive her with Queen Ahmose. The gods had chosen her, not by accident, but by design. It was not vanity. It was necessity. For the throne of Egypt was not easily wrested from precedent, but with divine sanction, careful imagery, and the quiet efficiency of a master stateswoman, Hatshepsut made the impossible seem natural. Now picture the court, the inner sanctum of Egyptian power. Priests, generals, scribes, and nobles gathered to watch this transition unfold. Some would have been uneasy. A woman on the throne defied centuries of tradition, but others saw order preserved, prosperity promised, and stability maintained. Under Hatshepsut, there was no upheaval, no civil strife. The transition was velvet smooth. She surrounded herself with loyal advisors, most notably Senenmut, a commoner turned statesman who rose through the ranks as tutor to her daughter Neferura. His relationship with Hatshepsut remains the subject of speculation, though the tone of records remains carefully formal. He was trusted, efficient, and loyal, exactly the kind of man a ruling queen needed. Senenmut oversaw monumental projects, coordinated propaganda, and perhaps, quietly, helped guide the early years of her singular reign. And so Egypt adjusted to the new reality. Hatshepsut's rule would last over 2 decades, marked not by war, but by building, diplomacy, and trade. Her court was orderly, her projects ambitious, her policies shrewd. To her people she became simply His Majesty. To history she became the anomaly, the woman who ruled like a man, but governed like no man ever had. This was the rise of Hatshepsut, not through violence, not through rebellion, but through understanding the levers of power. Through image, ritual, memory, and myth, she climbed the golden throne and sat upon it with quiet certainty. In the world of ancient Egypt, the divine was not rigid. Gods could shift shapes, wear many forms, and embody both masculine and feminine traits simultaneously. It was within this cosmology, this flexible theology, that Hatshepsut found space to express her own identity as pharaoh. To rule Egypt was not merely a political station, it was a sacred office. Pharaoh was not only king, but also a living god, an earthly avatar of divine order, Ma'at. And this role, historically and iconographically, had been exclusively male. Yet Hatshepsut did not discard her womanhood. Instead, she wove it into the royal narrative, cloaked in the language of the gods. Her solution was elegant. She was not pretending to be a man. She was becoming a king, and kingship in the Egyptian mind, was a role that could be filled by one chosen by the gods, regardless of their physical form. Imagine now the grand hypostyle halls of Karnak Temple. Carvings stretch upward in soft sandstone. Along the colonnades, there she is, Hatshepsut, depicted in the traditional attire of a male pharaoh. The false beard hangs ceremonially from her chin. She wears the royal kilt, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, and her posture exudes sovereignty. But her names, her cartouches, preserve the feminine form. She is not he, she is she, and she is Pharaoh. This dual representation was not accidental. It was a calculated use of the symbolic language Egyptians understood best: iconography, ritual, divine association. In public statues, she appeared masculine. In inscriptions, her femininity remained intact. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari refers to her with phrases like daughter of Amun, God's wife, and yet also His Majesty, the King. This juxtaposition, far from confusing, was spiritually profound. Egyptians were accustomed to paradox in their theology. Gods could be contradictory. Osiris was both dead and eternal. The goddess Sekhmet was a healer and destroyer. So why not a king who was both woman and man? Hatshepsut's own birth myth, carved into her mortuary temple, tells of the god Amun taking the form of her father and uniting with Queen Amosa. This myth made Hatshepsut not just royal, but divine from conception. She was not borrowing the throne. She was born to wear the crown, and so she reshaped the very concept of power in Egypt, not by changing what it meant to be a woman, but by changing what it meant to be king. Walk, in your mind, down the terraces of Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut's architectural masterpiece. Set against the stark cliffs of the Theban hills, the temple rises in 3 perfect tiers, connected by long ramps and flanked by colonnaded porticos. It is unlike anything Egypt had seen before. The temple was not merely a tomb. It was a theological statement. Here, Hatshepsut aligned herself with the gods in every line of stone. Each wall tells part of her divine narrative. There is the story of her miraculous birth, where Amun whispers prophecy. There are processions of foreign lands bringing tribute, acknowledging her God-ordained rule. There are hymns carved into stone, praising her as the living Horus, the rightful sovereign. Within the inner sanctums, altars were dedicated not only to herself, but to Hathor, the mother goddess of love, fertility, and royalty. Hathor was depicted nursing the pharaoh, symbolizing divine nourishment and legitimacy. In these depictions, Hatshepsut becomes the divine child, nurtured by the cosmic mother. Her temple also emphasized her role as goddess wife of Amun, a powerful religious title she had held even before ascending the throne. This position was more than ceremonial. It connected her to the priesthood, to ritual power, and to the wealth of the temple estates. In a land where gods walked among people, this link to Amun was politically invaluable. Hatshepsut's temple was not her only divine monument. At Karnak, the great temple complex of Amun-Ra, she erected not 1, but 2 towering obelisks, the largest the world had yet seen. Carved from a single block of rose granite, they soared skyward, gilded at the tips to catch the morning sun. Inscriptions ran along their sides, telling of her devotion to Amun and her desire to honor him above all gods. Imagine the laborers, the architects, the priests who watched these monoliths rise into the sky, symbols of both divine offering and royal permanence. In the inscriptions, she explains their creation as a vow to her god. I have done this from a loving heart. For my father Amun, I was wise in his plans. I know that he is pleased. Here again, Hatshepsut's gender fades into symbolism. The king is a conduit for divine power, and that role, like the rising sun, belongs not to gender, but to will, to purpose, to legacy. Statues of Hatshepsut in the form of a sphinx, lion-bodied and human-faced, emphasize another facet of her kingship. The sphinx, protector of sacred spaces, symbol of regal might, is nearly always male in Egyptian art. yet hers retain the softness of her features. In this fusion of strength and subtlety, Hatshepsut offers yet another image of rule. Not the crushing lion, but the watchful one. Not the destroyer of enemies, but the guardian of harmony. Through sculpture, inscription, architecture, and ritual, she built a divine identity that transcended expectation. What did her voice sound like as she addressed her court, her priests, her builders? Was it commanding, soft? Did it echo through the temple halls like the voice of a god? Or did it speak gently, carefully, like someone ever aware of walking a narrow line? We may never know, but in her proclamations carved in stone, we find traces of that voice, measured, deliberate, elegant. My heart turns itself to doing good. I have not forgotten the things of the past. There is no boast, no thunder, only the serenity of a ruler who knows she walks with the gods. Centuries later, much of Hatshepsut's image was erased. Her name chiseled from walls, her statues broken, her obelisks walled in. Scholars once believed it was revenge by Thutmose III. Today, some suspect it was a campaign of restoration, to realign the royal succession with traditional male lineage. Yet ironically, these acts of erasure only confirmed her power. One does not remove the memory of someone who was insignificant. One tries to forget what cannot be forgotten. And so Hatshepsut remains, not in bloodline, but in stone, not in legend, but in architecture, not as anomaly, but as testament. She was not simply a woman who ruled. She was a ruler who shaped the very language of power. As the sun sets gently behind the rugged cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, shadows stretch across the terraced temple of Hatshepsut, a monument that has withstood the slow caress of millennia. These silent stones tell stories etched in limestone and sandstone, stories of power, divinity, and mystery. Imagine standing there, feeling the cool evening air thick with the scent of dry earth and ancient incense, as you trace the worn carvings that have witnessed centuries of pilgrims, priests, and travelers. The architecture itself is a marvel of balance and harmony. Unlike the imposing, fortress-like pyramids of earlier dynasties, Hatshepsut's temple is open, airy, inviting contemplation. It was designed not just as a tomb, but as a celebration of life, divinity, and the eternal cycle of renewal. The terraces ascend gradually, as if leading the visitor from the earthly realm toward the heavens, each level adorned with reliefs depicting scenes of trade, divine birth, and ritual. Despite its grandeur, the exact location of Hatshepsut's tomb remained elusive for centuries. Unlike the pyramids, which dominate the landscape with their monumental presence, royal tombs of the New Kingdom were hidden in the Valley of the Kings, cut deep into the limestone cliffs to protect them from robbers. Archaeologists searching the valley have found a tomb, KV20, that is widely believed to be hers. It is unique in design, with long corridors and chambers extending deep underground. Imagine the cool darkness, the stillness, punctuated only by the echo of footsteps and the whisper of shifting dust. Inside, fragments of colourful wall paintings and inscriptions hint at the rituals and beliefs surrounding death and the afterlife. The journey of the soul, the transformation into Osiris, the god of the dead, all carefully mapped in hieroglyphs and imagery. Yet much of the tomb is damaged, its secrets scattered. Why such deliberate concealment? Was it an attempt to protect the queen's final resting place from desecration? Or was it part of a larger ritual of humility before the gods? One of the most enduring puzzles about Hatshepsut is the erasure of her memory following her death. Statues were defaced, her name removed from inscriptions, and her images recarved or painted over to depict her successor, Thutmose III. Archaeologists and historians have long debated the reasons. Some suggest a political purge, an effort by Thutmose III to reassert traditional male kingship and eliminate the unusual reign of a female pharaoh. Others propose that the priesthood of Amun, wary of Hatshepsut's increasing power and the religious authority she wielded, sought to restore the established order. The truth may be more complex. involving shifts in political alliances, religious changes, and dynastic concerns. The damage itself became a layer of history, obscuring her legacy while paradoxically drawing attention to it. Over time, numerous artifacts associated with Hatshepsut have surfaced: sculptures, statues, reliefs, and inscriptions, each a fragment of her story. Many were found scattered or repurposed in later constructions, a testament to the recycling of materials common in ancient Egypt. One can almost picture the craftsmen and laborers who worked tirelessly to erect her monuments, the sculptors chiseling her image in stone, the scribes carefully inscribing her divine birth narratives. Their hands left traces still visible today: a gentle curve of a lip, the outline of a headdress, the carved symbols of gods and kings. Among these artifacts is the famous statue of Hatshepsut as a sphinx, blending regal power with serene femininity. There are also stelae detailing her trading expeditions, particularly the famous voyage to the land of Punt, a mysterious, distant land rich in incense, myrrh, and exotic goods. These expeditions not only enriched Egypt, but also reinforced Hatshepsut's image as a wise and capable ruler. The rediscovery of Hatshepsut's reign in the 19th and 20th centuries reshaped Egyptology. For centuries, her rule was overshadowed by the dominance of male pharaohs like Ramses II and Tutankhamun. But as archaeologists uncovered her temples and inscriptions, a new narrative emerged, a story of a woman who navigated a male-dominated world with intelligence, grace, and determination. Today, her mortuary temple stands as a major tourist site, its terraces and reliefs studied and admired worldwide. Her tomb, though more modest and less visited, offers clues to the rituals and beliefs of her time. These discoveries invite reflection on the nature of history itself, how memory can be shaped, erased, and rediscovered, how power is recorded not only in grand monuments, but in the subtle traces left behind. Visiting Hatshepsut's temple or tomb is to enter a space where past and present converge. The stones whisper of rituals long ended, of prayers uttered in fading voices, of lives lived under the eternal gaze of gods. Imagine the faint rustle of robes, the soft footsteps of priests lighting lamps in shadowed chambers, the scent of lotus and frankincense drifting through open courtyards. This is not just a place of stone, but a living memory, breathing gently through the ages. In these quiet places, the hidden queen's story endures, not just in the records of scholars, but in the earth itself, the dust and the wind. Imagine waking before the sun has fully risen over the Nile, the soft glow of dawn filtering through the simple reed and mud brick homes of ancient Thebes. The air is cool and carries a faint scent of the river, moisture mingled with dry earth. The sounds are muted, the distant calls of waterfowl, the slow stirring of households beginning their day. Outside, the rhythm of life pulses gently. Farmers prepare for their work in the fertile fields along the Nile's banks. Fishermen gather their nets. Artisans sharpen their tools. This is a world bound intimately to the land and the river's flow, a world measured by the seasons, by the rising and setting of the sun. Homes were modest but functional. Walls made from sun-baked mud bricks kept out the desert heat, while flat roofs served as spaces to rest or sleep during warm nights. Inside, simple furnishings, woven mats, wooden stools, pottery jars filled the rooms. Families gathered around low tables to share meals of bread, lentils, onions, and occasionally fish or poultry. The aroma of freshly baked bread, warm and yeasty, often filled the air, mixed with the smoky scent of cooking fires. Water was drawn from nearby wells or the Nile itself, carried carefully in clay jars. Hygiene was a matter of daily routine, with bathing often performed in communal areas or the river, using fragrant oils and natural soaps made from plants. Neighbors were close, bound by community ties. Children played in the courtyards and alleys, their laughter mingling with the calls of merchants and the occasional bleat of goats. The daily work varied with the season. During the inundation, fields flooded and farming paused, while artisans, builders and scribes found work in cities and temples. Farmers used simple but effective tools, wooden plows pulled by oxen, sickles curved for harvesting grain. They tended wheat, barley, flax, and vegetables, always conscious of the river's generous but unpredictable gift. Fishermen cast nets into the Nile's green waters, bringing home tilapia, catfish, and perch. Their boats, crafted from bundles of papyrus reeds or wood, bobbed gently on the water as they worked. Craftsmen specialized in pottery, weaving, carpentry, and metalwork. Their hands shaped everyday items, pots, baskets, textiles, as well as intricate jewelry and ceremonial objects. Scribes held an honored place, literate and skilled in hieroglyphs and administrative records. Their work was meticulous, often performed in the cool, shaded rooms of temples or government offices. Meals were simple yet nourishing. Bread, made from emmer wheat, was the staple. It was often coarse and dense, sometimes sweetened with honey or mixed with dates. Vegetables like onions, garlic, lentils, and cucumbers accompanied meals, along with fruits such as figs and grapes. Meat was rarer, usually reserved for festivals or wealthier households. Beer, brewed from barley, was the common drink, nutritious, slightly sour, and often safer than river water. Its earthy aroma filled homes and taverns alike. Imagine the sounds of a bustling marketplace, vendors calling out their wares, the clinking of pottery, the rustle of woven mats, while the warm sun casts long shadows across the dusty streets. Religious observance was woven into daily routines. The gods were present everywhere, in the fields, the homes, the river. Offerings of food, incense, and prayers were common. Festivals punctuated the year with vibrant celebrations. Processions wove through the streets, priests carrying sacred statues under decorated canopies. Music, dancing, and feasting marked these occasions. The festival of Opet, honoring Amun, was among the grandest. Imagine the Nile lit by torches at night, boats adorned with flowers and banners, the air filled with chants and hymns. At home, small shrines might honor household gods, with family members lighting lamps and offering bread or beer. These intimate acts connected the mundane to the divine. The family was the core of Egyptian society. Marriages were often arranged but based on mutual respect. Parents guided children through early education and vocational training. Children helped with chores and learned skills from elders. Their laughter and curiosity filled homes and streets, a reminder of life's continuity. Social hierarchy was subtle but present. While Pharaoh and priests held ultimate power, merchants, artisans, farmers, and laborers each played essential roles. Women managed households, engaged in weaving, brewing, and market trade. Some held religious titles or operated small businesses. Their roles, while constrained by tradition, were vital and respected. Time was marked by the cycles of the Nile, its flooding, retreat, and the dry season. These natural rhythms dictated planting, harvesting, and trade. Calendars recorded religious festivals, agricultural cycles, and civic events. Imagine the soft scratch of reed pens on papyrus as scribes recorded the passage of days and deeds. Through this steady cadence, life unfolded, simple, ordered, deeply connected to the land and cosmos. The throne of Egypt was not passed lightly. It was not always inherited by the eldest son, nor was it always secured without contest. The balance between divine kingship and human ambition meant that the succession of pharaohs was often a quiet storm, carefully managed, deeply symbolic, and at times subtly contested. Imagine a grand chamber filled with soft golden light, filtered through carved stone lattices. Incense drifts lazily in the air as officials, priests, and nobles gather, each with a silent interest in the question of who will wear the double crown next. The succession of power in ancient Egypt was never just a matter of blood. It was a matter of legitimacy, ritual, and political choreography. And yet, with each transition, from one reign to the next, Egypt continued, its bureaucracies stable, its temples active, its people living their quiet lives under the long shadow of kings. To understand Hatshepsut's rise, we must revisit the foundations that made her unique. Her father, Thutmose I, had been a capable and successful ruler. Her mother, Amosa, was a queen of noble birth, possibly connected to the old royal family. This blend gave Hatshepsut both legitimacy and prestige. But it was the death of Thutmose I that opened the door to ambiguity. His son, Thutmose II, Hatshepsut's half-brother, became pharaoh and married Hatshepsut to strengthen his claim. Their union, while more political than romantic, cemented a delicate line of succession. When Thutmose II died young, the throne passed to Thutmose III, a child still too young to rule. And in this moment of uncertainty, Hatshepsut stepped forward, not as queen, not merely as regent, but as pharaoh. Her assumption of kingship would not be instant. It evolved slowly, from shared power to full coronation. For years, her image was portrayed alongside that of the young Thutmose III. She was, at first, the great royal wife, then God's wife of Amun, and finally, Matkare, the pharaoh of Egypt. Hatshepsut's rule was one of political finesse rather than military conquest. While her predecessors expanded Egypt's territory with sword and chariot, she expanded it through trade, construction, and religious influence. Her administration was filled with loyal officials, men like Senenmut, her steward and architect, who helped realize her ambitious temple projects. She ensured the bureaucracy remained stable and capable, and she positioned herself not as a disruptor, but as a restorer of order and tradition. To maintain power, Hatshepsut aligned herself closely with the priesthood of Amun, commissioning vast temples and emphasizing her divine birth, claiming the god Amun had fathered her in mortal disguise. These declarations, carved into stone and painted on temple walls, serve both religious and political aims. Through this sacred narrative, she was no longer merely a ruler. She was the divine daughter of the gods, chosen by the heavens, validated by tradition. But dynastic power is rarely shared forever. As Thutmose III came of age, he quietly reclaimed his role as pharaoh. There was no great rebellion, no bloodshed recorded, only a subtle shift in iconography and inscription. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III became one of Egypt's greatest military leaders, leading campaigns deep into Canaan and Nubia, expanding Egypt's borders to their greatest extent. And yet, years into his rule, he began a systematic removal of Hatshepsut's legacy. Her name was chiseled out, her statues defaced, her monuments reattributed. This was not mere vandalism, it was a calculated act of political archaeology, an attempt to rewrite the record of royal legitimacy. Was it resentment, a priestly agenda, a need to reinforce patriarchal norms? We cannot know. But what is clear is that Hatshepsut's reign was quietly folded into history, nearly lost for centuries, her memory buried beneath the layers of later rulers. Egyptian kingship was built on more than inheritance. It relied on ceremony, divine right, and the approval of the powerful priesthood. The pharaoh was not just a ruler, but the living embodiment of Ma'at, cosmic order. Any threat to that order, real or perceived, could not be tolerated. Thus, political transitions were veiled in ceremony, dressed in myth, and executed with calm precision. When a ruler died, their heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at in the afterlife. But in life, it was their decisions, who they favored, who they promoted, who they silenced, that determined the legacy they left behind. Across centuries, Egypt's throne passed from hand to hand, sometimes within a family, sometimes to ambitious generals or priests. The late New Kingdom saw high priests of Amun wielding more power than pharaohs, and the third intermediate period brought fragmentation and foreign influence. Even great dynasties, like those of the Ramesside kings, eventually crumbled beneath the weight of corruption, economic strain, and foreign threats. Yet through it all, the institutions of Egypt endured. The scribes kept records, the temples held rituals, and the Nile flowed as always. The throne was a seat of immense power, but also of isolation, each ruler encircled by ritual, divinity, and expectation. The case of Hatshepsut stands as a poignant example of how legacy can be reshaped. She ruled successfully for over 2 decades, yet was deliberately omitted from king lists. Her monuments desecrated, her memory nearly erased, and yet history has a way of resurfacing what is buried. In the 19th century, scholars began to uncover fragments of her rule, statues with delicate features and false beards, inscriptions hidden beneath later carvings, clues that pointed to a forgotten queen who had once ruled as king. Today, she is one of the most studied and admired pharaohs in all of Egyptian history. Her story a quiet testament to the resilience of truth, even when power seeks to hide it. In ancient Egypt, the divine was not distant. The gods were not abstract or aloof. They walked among the people, visible in statues, present in the wind that swept over the Nile, echoing in temple chants, and reflected in the still water of sacred pools. Religion was not confined to the grand temples or state rituals. It was embedded in the daily rhythm of life. A farmer might whisper to Osiris before planting his seeds. A mother might offer a pinch of incense to Taweret, the hippopotamus-shaped goddess who protected childbirth. A fisherman might murmur a prayer to Sobek, the crocodile god, before venturing into the reeds. Even the simplest home bore traces of devotion. Little household shrines tucked into corners, carved amulets worn for protection, bowls of food left as offerings for ancestors. Religion was life. And life was religion. The universe, to the ancient Egyptians, was not chaotic. It was ordered and delicately balanced. This balance was known as ma'at, a concept that wove together truth, justice, cosmic harmony, and rightful order. Pharaohs were not merely kings, they were the living manifestation of ma'at, the ones who preserved the sacred balance between gods and men, between chaos and order. Imagine standing before a colossal stone carving of Ma'at, a woman with a single feather upon her head, eyes calm, lips composed. In every court decision, every state ritual, and every harvest festival, Ma'at was invoked. This was not just faith. It was the glue that held together Egypt's vast, ancient society. The temple was the axis around which public life revolved. These were not simply places of worship. They were cosmic machines, carefully oriented to stars and solstices, designed as stairways between the human and the divine. Each temple was considered the literal dwelling place of a god. The inner sanctuary was dark, quiet, and sacred, housing the cult statue, a divine presence kept from common sight. Only the high priests entered this space, their rituals performed with solemn precision. At dawn, the god's statue was awakened, washed with sacred waters, dressed in fine linen, perfumed with incense. Offerings were presented: bread, wine, honey, beer, flowers. The rituals followed patterns thousands of years old. Outside the sanctuary, life continued. Pilgrims left votive offerings, music echoed in processional halls, scribes recorded donations and festivals. The temple was a place of awe and reverence, but also of employment, education, and commerce. In Hatshepsut's Egypt, Amun stood at the apex of the divine order. A once local god of Thebes, Amun had risen over centuries to national prominence. By the 18th dynasty, he was not just a god, he was the god, worshipped as a universal force behind all creation. Temples to Amun, like the sprawling Karnak complex, were architectural declarations of faith and power. Hatshepsut, in particular, aligned herself with Amun closely, declaring herself his daughter, claiming divine selection for her rule. This connection was not merely symbolic, it was strategic. By emphasizing her divine origin, she legitimized her unprecedented reign as a female pharaoh. She built obelisks, carved narratives, and funded priesthoods, all centered on Amun's supremacy. The priests of Amun, in turn, became immensely powerful, controlling wealth, land, and influence that rivaled the crown itself. Egyptian religion was not monolithic. Its pantheon was wide and varied, with gods taking human, animal, and composite forms. Each god served specific roles, governed particular domains, and held unique relationships with regions and individuals. There was Ra, the sun god, who sailed across the sky by day and through the underworld by night. Isis, the divine mother, protectress of magic and resurrection. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of the gods, patron of writing and knowledge. Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of the dead, who oversaw mummification and the weighing of hearts. These deities were not locked in stone. They evolved over time, merged with local cults, shifted in importance. Gods could be merged. Ra with Amun became Amun-Ra. Horus and Seth could be both rivals and reconciled. Belief was flexible, layered, poetic. For Egyptians, the divine was not distant. It was multifaceted, living, responsive. While state religion was structured and elaborate, mystery always played a role. Not all rituals were public. Some were known only to the initiated. Priests carried knowledge that was secret, preserved in scrolls and whispers. Rites of initiation, funerary practices, and the rituals of the dead were cloaked in secrecy. The journey through the Duat, the underworld, was chronicled in sacred texts like the Book of the Dead, the Amduat, and the Book of Gates. These were not just symbolic, they were literal maps to navigate the afterlife. Imagine lying in a tomb chamber, the walls around you painted with luminous figures. Gods, stars, serpents, rivers of fire, all telling the soul's journey through darkness toward rebirth. These beliefs shaped how Egyptians lived and how they died. Life was merely a preparation for a much longer journey. Despite the grandeur of temples, ordinary Egyptians also maintained rich spiritual lives. Most never saw the inner sanctuary of a temple, but they made pilgrimages during festivals, carried amulets for protection, recited prayers over meals and births and illnesses. Demotic spells, incantations, and charms have been found inscribed on pottery shards or hidden in graves. Personal appeals to gods for healing, fertility, or justice. The line between official and folk religion was blurred. Deified ancestors, protective spirits, and animal gods played roles in daily devotion. For example, the cat, embodying the goddess Bastet, was revered in households. Cats were protectors from pests, symbols of grace and mystery, and even mourned when lost. Every layer of Egyptian society, from palace to village, lived beneath the gaze of the gods. Religion in ancient Egypt was marked by repetition, daily rituals, seasonal festivals, annual processions. This repetition wasn't rote, it was comfort. It was the reaffirmation of order, the anchoring of the world in divine stability. Just as the Nile flooded and receded, just as stars rose and set, so too did the gods remain eternal. Their rituals did not change. Their power did not waver. This unchanging rhythm brought peace in a world that could otherwise be uncertain. Hatshepsut's temples, in particular, echo this sense of permanence. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri stands as a quiet symphony in stone. Terraced, harmonious, serenely aligned with sacred geography. Its reliefs tell tales of divine birth, of trade with Punt, of offerings to gods. Yet they also convey silence, symmetry, and timelessness, a divine stillness, captured in architecture. While the majority of ancient Egyptians lived close to the soil, tied to the Nile's cycle and the struggles of subsistence, there existed another class, a class that walked polished stone floors, wore linen robes spun fine as spider silk, and dined by the flickering light of oil lamps from bowls painted in lapis hues. This was the noble class, the administrators, military commanders, priests, and provincial governors who stood beneath the Pharaoh yet above the multitudes. Their world moved at a different pace, cushioned by privilege and ritual, yet still bound to the rhythms of duty, service, and sacred tradition. Imagine a villa near Thebes, not a palace, but a substantial estate built from mud brick and timber. The outer walls are plain, protective, and inward-facing. But inside, the home opens into sunlit courtyards, shaded porticos, and gardens lined with date palms and papyrus pools. Rooms are cooled by breeze and shadow. Floors are painted with scenes of lotus flowers and wild fowl. Furniture is spare but elegant. Wooden stools inlaid with ivory, beds woven with leather thongs, chests filled with linen garments and carved combs. A nobleman's day begins not with toil, but with ceremony. Servants bring scented oils and fresh clothing. Breakfast might be bread, honey, fruit, and beer, simple but abundant. Outside, the estate is busy. Scribes record grain tallies. Overseers manage laborers. Gardeners tend vegetables and flowers. Even a moderate household hums with activity, sustained by dozens of workers, most of them enslaved or indentured. The master oversees, writes letters, receives petitions. The lady of the house may supervise weaving workshops or plan a household feast. It is a life far removed from the riverbank farmer, and yet it is still Egypt, still under the gaze of the gods. Nobles in Hatshepsut's Egypt were not only leaders, they were curators of memory. Their tombs, unlike those of commoners, were sprawling testaments to their earthly achievements. Carved into rock cliffs or built in the desert, these tombs were decorated with autobiographical inscriptions, scenes of banquets, boats, hunting trips, and processions of servants bearing tribute. They were statements of identity, not just who the person was, but how they wished to be remembered. One noble might describe his faithful service under 2 pharaohs, another her piety and generosity to Amun's temple. Their hieroglyphs are carefully composed, rhythmic, and measured, like poetry. In these tombs, we glimpse the quiet pride of Egypt's elite, their devotion to family, their loyalty to the crown, and their belief that their life had contributed to the eternal balance of Ma'at. Hatshepsut's reign brought subtle shifts to women's status among the elite. Though most women did not wield power like the pharaoh herself, noble women in her time often served as priestesses, property holders, and managers of estates. In temple reliefs, we see them adorned in linen sheaths and intricate jewelry, collars of faience and gold, bracelets shaped like lotus petals. They play harps, pour libations, and whisper prayers. Their roles were both sacred and administrative. A woman of the elite might own vineyards, commission household shrines, and even fund sections of temple construction. Marriage, while central to household life, did not always limit a woman's independence. Letters from the period, found on scraps of papyrus, reveal affectionate correspondences between husbands and wives, mothers and sons, suggesting complex emotional lives that paralleled the political. Even in a deeply patriarchal structure, elite women held influence, not just in households, but in memory and ritual. To rise among the elite, one needed more than birthright. Literacy, diplomacy, and religious knowledge were tools of advancement. A young noble boy might be sent to scribal school by age 7. There, under the eye of a stern tutor, he'd copy lists, write prayers, and recite proverbs etched onto limestone shards. Mastery of hieroglyphs meant access to administration, priesthood, or royal service. Later, he might train in military arts or temple rituals. His life would unfold in carved reliefs, etched forever into tomb walls, bowing before the pharaoh, leading a trade expedition, offering incense at a festival. Status was earned as much as inherited, and with power came responsibility. Nobles oversaw grain storage, labor allocation, tax collection. They mediated disputes, interpreted omens, and maintained order in the nome, the administrative district. They were the skeletal frame of Hatshepsut's Egypt, supporting her reign while basking in the reflected light of her power. If you closed your eyes and drifted back to one of their feasts, you might hear the music first, plucked strings, flutes, the soft rhythm of clapping. Then voices, laughter, storytelling, toasts in the name of the gods. The air would be rich with the smell of roasted goose, fresh herbs, dates, and incense. Banquets were not merely indulgence, they were rituals of power and generosity, affirmations of social bonds. The host demonstrated status by abundance, the guests responded with loyalty and praise. Men wore white kilts and shaved heads. Women donned perfumed cones atop braided wigs. Servants passed among low tables with jugs of wine and platters of bread. And always music. Trained musicians and dancers performed for hours, their movements slow and deliberate, more ceremonial than sensual. Feasts ended late, and guests were often sent home with tokens, bracelets, scented oils, sometimes gifts of fine linen or crafted amulets. A noble's generosity was his currency. reputation was as valuable as gold. Not all was peaceful in elite circles. With influence came rivalry. Underneath the calm facades, there were currents of competition, subtle shifts of alliance, whispered criticisms, and quiet ambitions. Especially during Hatshepsut's early reign, the placement of trusted officials was crucial. She relied on loyal nobles like Senenmut, her steward and possible confidant, to manage delicate affairs. Scribes recorded appointments, land grants, decrees. The careful language of these inscriptions suggests negotiations behind closed doors, the balancing of favor between temple, throne, and province. Yet for all the drama that might exist, the tone remained measured, formal, almost serene. Conflict was not spoken of. It was masked in ceremony, addressed in reshuffling of positions, or left to fade in the silence of papyrus that no longer survives. The true language of politics was not shouted. It was written in stone, quiet and enduring. Perhaps the most telling glimpse into elite life comes not from their homes, but their tombs. In one tomb, a noble is shown playing senet with his wife, an eternal game etched in ochre and cobalt. In another, a woman sits serenely beneath a fig tree, attendants offering bowls of fruit. There is joy, stability, permanence. These scenes are idealized, certainly, but they reflect values that were deeply felt: family, order, duty, abundance, and rest. The afterlife was not a battlefield or a celestial court. It was a continuation of the best parts of earthly life, free from pain, full of music, shaded by trees. The nobleman believed that by living rightly, by serving the gods and the Pharaoh, he earned this rest. His ka or spirit would return to this painted world again and again, forever welcomed, forever whole. Imagine yourself standing at the base of a monument that stretches into the golden sky, each block weathered but still monumental in its bearing. The sun warms the stone, and the shadows pool in the carved hieroglyphs that speak of eternity. These are not simply structures, they are promises made in granite. In Hatshepsut's Egypt, building was not just about architecture. It was an act of worship, of statecraft, and of spiritual alchemy. Hatshepsut's reign was a golden age of construction. Few pharaohs matched her ambition in stone. She restored temples, commissioned obelisks, and created the architectural marvel of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. But behind the grandeur lies a quieter story: the lives of the builders, the knowledge of the architects, and the mystery of how such feats were achieved without iron tools, cranes, or modern machines. This is a segment where the rhythm of chisels replaces the beat of drums, and where the whispers of laborers echo through chambers carved into living rock. Far from the monumental facades and royal ceremonies, nestled between hills of limestone and dry riverbeds, lay a village unlike any other, Deir el-Medina. It was home to the artisans who built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and, likely, those who shaped parts of Hatshepsut's own funerary complex. Their homes were small, clustered together with mud brick walls and modest courtyards, but within those walls lived knowledge passed from father to son, a trade that touched the eternal. These were not merely workers, they were skilled craftsmen, draftsmen, stonemasons, painters, and scribes. The village operated under strict order. Each man had his task. One shaped limestone, another smoothed plaster, another outlined gods with red ochre before the final inking in black. They worked by torchlight in the tombs, day after day, following designs that married divine proportion with artistic tradition. From ostraca, broken shards used as notepads, we find their notes, sketches, complaints, and jokes. One shard shows a worker's drawing of a cat dressed as a noblewoman. Another records absences. He was ill. His wife was giving birth. He went to fetch stones. Their lives, though hidden from royal memory, were precise, disciplined, and quietly proud. Egyptian builders did not guess. They measured. The art of monument construction was a fusion of mathematics, cosmology, and ritual. At Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut's temple is built in terraces that rise in harmony with the cliffs behind, creating a visual illusion of continuity between nature and man-made divinity. The axes of the temple align with solstices and star risings. Columns are spaced not randomly, but with precise intervals meant to channel light in specific ways during festivals. The very choice of location, facing Karnak across the Nile, was symbolic. It was dialogue in stone between the mortal and divine. To walk through the temple is to enter a calendar written in architecture. Light and shadow mark sacred days. Reliefs depict her divine birth, her expedition to Punt, her offerings to Amun, not just as record, but as spellwork to maintain cosmic order. All of this, conceived without blueprints in the modern sense. Designs were sketched on papyrus and limestone. Master architects like Inanni and Senenmut supervised with teams of foremen. Mistakes were chiseled out and corrected. Nothing was haphazard. Every inch served a purpose. The mystery deepens when we ask the practical question: how did they build so much with such precision, using only copper and bronze tools? The answer lies in technique, patience, and an intimate knowledge of material. Stones were quarried using dolerite hammers, round, hard stones used to pound and fracture limestone or sandstone. Copper chisels were used for finer detail, constantly sharpened on sandstone blocks. Rope and wooden sleds moved massive blocks, while laborers poured water on sand to reduce friction. To raise obelisks, like the two Hatshepsut commissioned at Karnak, massive earthen ramps were built and dismantled. The obelisks themselves were cut from a single piece of granite at Aswan, then floated down the Nile on huge barges. Aligning these into place required coordination, planning, and perhaps rituals now lost to time. The work was slow, but relentless. Each groove, each joint, each hidden chamber was shaped with the awareness that it must last not for years, but for centuries, and so far it has. What did these craftsmen believe as they carved images of gods, shaped tombs for nobles, or raised pylons that scraped the sky? They believed their work was sacred, that to decorate a tomb was not mere ornamentation, it was to construct the house of eternity. That to paint the god Amun-Osai or a pharaoh Sas-Kartush was an act of spiritual transmission. We find prayers carved into hidden corners, appeals to local deities for protection. Some artisans drew their own likeness into tomb paintings, perhaps hoping to share in the eternal blessings meant for their master. Workmen at Deir el-Medina buried their dead in modest tombs nearby, decorated with smaller versions of elite iconography. They too believed in the afterlife. They too longed for a restful eternity. It is tempting to romanticize their lives, but their ostraca also record conflicts, strikes, and mismanagement. They protested late rations. They had disputes with supervisors. They were human, bound by fatigue and frustration as much as by faith. But they worked in service of something far larger than themselves, the perpetuity of memory. Perhaps nowhere is the work of Hatshepsut's builders more poignant than in the Valley of the Kings. Though her own tomb lies separate, deeper in the cliff face, the entire valley speaks the language of devotion. Silence lies thick here. The tombs disappear into the rock like veins. Inside, colour still clings to walls. Blues, reds, yellows, each pigment ground by hand, each figure painted with care. We walk softly, listening to echoes of voices long gone, the instructions of the foreman, the scrape of a chisel, the hum of a tune sung to pass the time. These were sounds not meant for public ears. They were whispers to eternity. In this sacred space, we are reminded that Egypt's immortality was not secured by pharaohs alone, but by those who built their dreams. Among Hatshepsut's most striking achievements were the obelisks at Karnak. Towering columns of rose granite, polished to a high sheen, inscribed with hieroglyphs extolling her piety and divine right. These were not mere decorations. They were cosmic antennas, symbols of the Benben stone from the creation myth, connecting earth to sky. Their pointed tips were often capped in electrum, catching the morning sun like a flame. One of Hatshepsut's obelisks still stands today. The other fell long ago, but the fragments remain. She called them my two great obelisks, which stand at the gate of the temple, whose tips touch the sky, a marvel for all people who behold them. And so they were, and are. Even broken, they testify to a ruler's vision, and to the unseen hands that made it real. When a monument was finished, it was not simply handed over, it was consecrated. Rituals were performed, offerings made, priests walked its perimeter, sacred oils were poured, names were spoken aloud, carved in deep relief to endure the passage of centuries. Completion was not a stopping point, it was a beginning. The building, now infused with divine presence, began its true function, as a place of contact between the earthly and the eternal. And for the builders, it marked another cycle, another project, another call to carve the impossible from silence and stone. Imagine the desert long after the footsteps have vanished, after the celebrations have ended, after the drums have ceased to echo against the stone. Imagine the stillness that lingers when memory begins to slip away. Hatshepsut's Egypt was filled with voices, those of priests, scribes, masons, farmers, traders. But after her death, a different kind of silence took root, one of omission, of erasure. The legacy she carved in stone began, little by little, to fade not through the decay of time, but through deliberate human hands. How does one remove a name from eternity? How does an empire choose what is remembered and what is quietly buried? This is the story not just of Hatshepsut's greatness, but of its attempted unmaking. After Hatshepsut's passing, her stepson and co-ruler, Thutmose III, emerged as sole pharaoh. By then, he was an experienced statesman and military leader. For years, he had ruled alongside her in ceremonial partnership, though it's unclear how much true power he wielded in her shadow. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He continued her building programs. He expanded the empire through military campaigns. Life at court maintained its rhythm, but then something changed. Roughly 2 decades after her death, a systematic campaign began. Her name was chiseled out from monuments, her image defaced, her cartouches removed or replaced. In some cases, entire statues were buried or repurposed. Reliefs showing her in kingly regalia were altered, sometimes replaced with images of Thutmose the Firm or Thutmose III. It was not a frenzied act of vengeance. It was careful, thorough, and targeted, and yet not universal. Some of her works remained untouched. Her grand temple at Deir el-Bahari still stood, though sections bore the scars of erasure. Scholars have long debated why. Was it political retaliation, an effort to rewrite history and re-establish male pharaonic tradition, or a calculated move to secure a unified lineage, restoring continuity by removing an anomaly? Whatever the motive, the result was the same. Hatshepsut began to vanish from official memory. Erasure in ancient Egypt was no small thing. It required bureaucracy, teams of workers, orders from above, a royal edict. Removing a name from a temple wall took more effort than carving it in the first place. Stone does not surrender easily. Some removals are clean, chiseled away and smoothed over. Others are clumsy, leaving ghost-like impressions where hieroglyphs once proclaimed her power. Even her famous obelisks were not immune. One was enclosed within a protective wall, obscuring it from view but leaving it intact, a paradox of preservation through concealment. The campaign extended beyond the capital. Names were blotted out from tomb inscriptions, administrative records, and royal lists. Hatshepsut's official reign was omitted in king lists composed under later dynasties. To an outsider, it might appear she had never ruled at all. And yet, some traces remained. Despite all efforts, memory lingers in curious ways. A name removed may still be read. Reliefs chiseled away often leave outlines, like faded footprints in ancient dust. The erasure itself becomes evidence of what once was. Ironically, in the act of removal, the erasers affirmed her importance. They preserved the shape of her legacy, even as they sought to dismantle it. In some cases, her titles were merely adjusted, statues were reattributed, inscriptions altered to refer to His Majesty rather than her. But the face beneath the damage often remained unmistakably feminine. In other words, they could not fully remove her, they could only attempt to reframe her. And so, Hatshepsut remained, half visible, half concealed, like a figure behind a veil. It would take over 3 millennia before Hatshepsut's name would return to common knowledge. In the 19th century, Western archaeologists, tomb robbers, and collectors combed through Egypt's ancient sites. At Deir el-Bahari, ruins were excavated, temples unearthed, fragments studied. Among these remnants, the strange story of a female king began to emerge. At first, scholars were confused. Who was this Hatshepsut? Why did she appear in kingly garb? Why was her name sometimes missing and other times intact? It was Egyptologist Edouard Naville, working in the 1890s, who undertook systematic work at her mortuary temple. But it was Howard Carter, before his fame from Tutankhamun, who uncovered key evidence confirming her identity. Among the most striking finds was a mummy in the tomb KV60, long unidentified, lying near that of her wet nurse, Sitra-In. For years, it was speculated that this unwrapped, unassuming body could be Hatshepsut herself. In 2007, with the aid of CT scanning and DNA analysis, the mystery narrowed. A missing tooth, found in a canopic box bearing her cartouche, matched the jaw of the KV60 mummy. While not absolute, it offered compelling evidence. The ghost of Hatshepsut had a face again. Today, Hatshepsut's memory has returned, not in the blaring light of fame, but in the quiet dignity of truth reclaimed. She is now recognized as one of the most successful and visionary rulers of Egypt's long history. Her story is told in museums and lecture halls. Her temple draws visitors from around the world. Scholars debate her reign, her policies, her gender, and her influence with newfound respect. But there is something poetic in the fact that it was not her enemies who preserved her legacy, but the stone itself. The carvings she commissioned, the buildings she raised, the obelisks she dedicated, they could not be fully erased. Stone forgets slowly, and sometimes not at all. In reflecting on Hatshepsut's story, we're reminded of all the other lives that went unrecorded. The builders who left no name, the farmers who sowed grain for the temple, the traders who carried incense from Punt, the women who bore children and watched over hearths. Hatshepsut's erasure was deliberate. Theirs was systemic. They too are part of Egypt's long sleep, its quiet breath beneath the sands. But through objects, through fragments, through the mundane preserved in extraordinary conditions, they speak. A pot, a shard, a scarab seal, each a whisper from the past. Their stories remind us that history is not just what is remembered, but what is almost forgotten. At night, the sky over Thebes blooms with stars. The temple of Deir el-Bahari stands in silhouette against the cliffs. The desert is silent, save for the wind passing through stone colonnades and open courtyards. Somewhere beneath, the bones of Hatshepsut lie in peace. She is no longer a name erased, but a name restored. Her story, a woman who became king, ruled wisely, built monuments, launched trade, claimed divine birth, is once again part of the human record. And like the stars above, her legacy shines brightest in the dark. And now, as we leave the sands of ancient Egypt behind, let the echoes of stone and the rhythm of river life fade gently into the distance. The world of Hatshepsut was a place of ritual and routine, of majesty and mystery. A land where time flowed not in seconds or minutes, but in floods and festivals, in ploughing seasons and star risings. A world deeply different from ours, and yet not so unfamiliar. We too build monuments in memory. We too strive to be remembered. And so, as you rest your eyes and allow the calm of history to lull you towards sleep, know this. In some quiet way, by listening, you've helped bring Hatshepsut back from the silence. May your dreams carry you down the Nile, beneath the gaze of stone gods and golden stars, into the soft hush of an ancient land that once was, and in memory still is. Good night.